Just as applying the law of perspective to the horizon tells us that our Earth is indeed flat, the same principle applies to the setting of our sun. The scientist liars of our world tell us that the sun is 109 times more massive than the Earth, and that it is 93 million miles away. They state that the split between day and night is because the Earth is rotating, and that when we see the sun set we are witnessing the rotation and our arrival into the dark phase of the spin, which is a time frame called night and when our moon becomes visible. Much like the proposed curvy nature of our world and the theory of gravity, this is complete nonsense. Before turning our attention to the sun, let's first look at two examples that debunk the heliocentric model of a rotating globular Earth. The first is the New York City skyline as seen from Harriman State Park's Bear Mountain, which is 60 miles away. If the Earth was a spinning globe of 25,000 miles in circumference, then this viewing from Bear Mountain's 1,283-foot summit should be impossible. If we take Pythagorean theorem, which determines the distance to the horizon being 1.23 times the square root of the height in feet, then this skyline should be invisible behind 170 feet of curved Earth. It should actually be beneath the horizon. Similarly, when ships pass the ocean's horizon, they should technically be vanishing over the curve of the Earth. A strong camera lens, however, proves this to be false. Ships do not vanish over the curve of the Earth, but vanish beyond our limits of perspective. The law of perspective on a flat plane dictates that a receding object diminishes in angle and height until the line of sight converges to a vanishing point, or what is called the horizon, in which the object then becomes invisible. The scientist liars claim that the sun sets and vanishes beyond the curve of the Earth, but this is nothing more than the sun moving beyond the vanishing point of perspective, which is determined by the limitations of our eyes, other objects, and weather. The same law applies to how we see the sun and its rising and setting. The sun never rises or sets. It is an optical illusion determined by the laws of perspective. We think we see the sun rise and set because of the convergent and divergent nature of our line of sight. For instance, this row of street lamps appears to decrease in size further down the line of sight before vanishing completely, when in fact all street lamps are of the same height and continue to border the walkway well beyond the vanishing point. This is the same with this line of HP bottles. They are all the same size and they do not change size. It is just our perspective that makes it seem like they do. This is precisely what we experience when we watch the sun rise, set, and journey across our flat Earth. NASA and many other lying magicians tell us our sun is 93 million miles from the Earth and 109 times larger than the Earth. However, amateur balloon footage taken from the clouds prove that the sun is not 93 million miles away or bigger than the Earth. What the footage shows is a locally illuminating sun cast in a localized hotspot over the Earth. If it were millions of miles away, this local hotspot would not be possible. Furthermore, if the sun was not a local luminary, then we would not experience crepuscular sun rays. The angle of the sun rays that we see when light breaks through the clouds would not be possible, and we have thousands upon thousands of photographic and empirical evidence of the sunlight behaving this way. If the sun were 93 million miles away, then its light should form a straight beam and not be displayed in angled rays. If the sun is so far away, then why does it grow so much with just a small rise in altitude on Earth? At 93 million miles away, this rise in altitude should be negligible or non-existent. The change in size suggests a locally illuminating sun that is not an inconceivable 93 million miles away, but is actually relatively close to Earth, journeying just above the clouds. And it is not 109 times larger than the Earth, but actually a lot smaller than the Earth. Our first-hand experience of the sun and the moon is that they are nigh on equal in size and circular shapes that journey similar circular paths over our flat, stationary plane. The scientist magicians make up these complicated theories of perfect spherical bodies of rock and gigantic balls of hot plasma that come with incomprehensible distances and calculations that bamboozle us. Anyone can use their common sense to discern that the sun and moon are of similar size, and the moon is not a ball of rock.
And they just start making stuff up.
Yeah.
Like that Neil Armstrong guy. Have you seen him on the talk shows?
Neil Armstrong, you mean the first man to walk on the moon?
Talk about a fish story.
Yeah.
Man, and they're buying it.
Oh, yeah.
Many have studied the sun and moon's light. The sun's light is warm and drying. It preserves matter and prevents decay. If you leave fruits out in the sun, it will preserve them, like with sun-dried tomatoes and raisins. It is antiseptic and healing. The moon's light, however, is cold, damp, causes putrefaction and decay, and is septic. The sun's rays decrease the combustions of a bonfire, while the moon's light increases it. People have studied the temperature of the moonlight and were surprised to find that at night the temperature of direct moonlight is colder than the temperature of the shade. This proves that these two luminaries are unique and opposites in nature. It also undercuts NASA's claims that the moon reflects the sunlight. If that were the case, then the moonlight should have a degree of residual warmth to it and not be colder than the shade at nighttime. Furthermore, the moon cannot simultaneously be a spherical body and a reflector of the sun's light. When light is shined upon a spherical body, it produces this. Reflectors have to be flat or concave to actually reflect. A spherical convex surface results in no reflection. Again, basic, repeatable, verifiable and real science works against a magician's space saga hoax. A lot of photographic and film footage also proves that the moon is semi-transparent. When the waxing or waning moon is visible during the day, it's sometimes possible to see the blue sky right through the moon. Sometimes at night it is even possible to see stars directly through the surface of the moon. The Royal Astronomical Society has documented many of these instances. Faith believers in the pseudoscience of the rotating ball often use the moon's surface as proof of the heliocentric model, in which the moon appears upside down in the southern hemisphere and the opposite in the north. But again, this proves the stationary Earth. Time-lapse photography shows that it is the moon that turns clockwise like a rotating disc over the Earth, and this is only possible if the Earth is stationary and it is the moon itself that is moving. You see, the Sun and Moon luminaries rotate around our flat disk Earth in a similar way to the hands of a clock, dictating time and seasons and the fluctuating balance of dark and light, preservation and decay. In fact, our flat Earth is the oldest clock of them all, and this is how solar and lunar eclipses are possible. The heliocentric model completely fails when studying lunar eclipses. For a lunar eclipse to take place in the globe model, the Sun has to be reflecting the Earth's shadow onto the Moon, and all three have to be aligned in a straight 180-degree syzygy. But since the beginning of time, lunar eclipses have been observed while both the Sun and the Moon are simultaneously visible in the sky. Furthermore, when looking into the mechanisms of a solar eclipse, the heliocentric lie once again falls apart. As this footage demonstrates, the Sun and the Moon have to be roughly a similar size for a solar eclipse halo to form.
Representing my sun source and a penny representing the Moon. And as you can see, the flashlight is a lot larger than the penny. Okay, now let's place the Sun 93 million miles out into space like this. And let's get our penny a lot closer to the camera. Okay, where it's about the same size as the flashlight in perspective. Okay, now that doesn't look right. You can't see the corona. And it just doesn't eclipse. You can still see it light all around. It's not a total blackout. Okay, now I have a side light on the side of this flashlight that just so happens to be the exact same size in diameter as the penny, which is perfect for our next test because the Sun and the Moon are the same size on a flat Earth. And we'll bring the Sun in closer to us as it would be on a flat Earth. Now let's try our eclipse with the Moon right underneath the Sun. And wow, there's the corona.
If the Sun was 400 times bigger than the Moon, then its light would devour the Moon and we would not witness the halo, or corona. If the Earth was a rotating ball heated by a Sun that is a distance of 93 million miles away, it would be impossible to have a boiling hot summer on a continent like Africa, but a few thousand miles away, absolutely freezing conditions in Antarctica, which experiences no heat from the Sun. As Eric Dubay states, if the heat has travelled 93 million miles to the Sahara Desert, then it is absurd to think that it could not travel another 4,000 miles to Antarctica. This is a difference of 0.0004%. If the Earth was a globe, then the Arctic and Antarctic polar regions should share similar conditions due to their comparable latitude. However, this is not the case. Antarctica is the coldest place on Earth with an average yearly temperature of -57 degrees and a record low of -135.8 degrees. The average annual temperature of the North Pole, by contrast, is a mild 4 degrees. The northern Arctic enjoys mild warm summers and survivable winters. The Antarctic is so cold and harsh, the ice never melts. This would be impossible on a globular Earth rotating on its axis. Eric Dubay also points out that Iceland, at 65 degrees north latitude, is home to 870 species of native plants and an abundance of animal life. At the South Pole, by contrast, as Captain Cook wrote, "Not a tree was to be seen. The lands which lie to the south are doomed by nature to perpetual frigidness, never to feel the warmth of the sun's rays, whose horrible and savage aspect I have not words to describe. Even marine life is sparse in certain tracts of vast extent, and the sea bird is seldom observed flying over such lonely wastes. The contrast between the limits of organic life in Arctic and Antarctic zones is very remarkable and significant." The sun's yearly motion from tropic to tropic, solstice to solstice, is what determines the length of the days and nights and the appearance of seasons. This is why regions on the equator experience almost annual summer conditions, and the north and south latitudes experience more defined seasons with winters. The sun and moon do not just journey our flat earth in one large circle, but rather a series of circles, or what is better understood as a conical coil spring-like motion, which dictates the change in season and the length of the days. That is why it is possible to see a midnight sun in the Arctic, and time-lapse footage of this shows that the sun does not set but circles the pole. The scientist priests lie and say this is due to the poles on either end of the spherical globe, and that Antarctica also experiences a midnight sun. But we have no amateur footage of this, as no one is permitted to explore the region. And all official footage is highly suspect as either Photoshop or manipulated. Furthermore, if there was such a phenomenon in the Antarctic, then why does nothing grow there? NASA claims that the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles per hour around its central axis, travelling at 67,000 miles per hour around the Sun, and spiralling at 500,000 miles per hour around the Milky Way, while the entire galaxy is travelling at 670 million miles per hour through the universe. If this was the case, then the North Pole star, or what is known as Polaris, should not remain a constant in the night sky. It always remains perfectly situated above the North Pole, despite all this motion and journeying. The word planet originates from the ancient Greek planetes, which translates to wandering or to wander. And the Greeks were correct. It is the stars above that are moving, not us on our flat, stationary Earth. Look. fixed constant in the middle, and all the other stars turn perfect circles around it. If the Earth was spinning at 1,000 miles per hour, the stars would be seen to travel more or less horizontally across the sky. But this is not the case. The stars form perfect circles above, emanating out from Polaris, and this can be observed all the way to the Tropic of Capricorn. The reason Polaris never moves is because the North Pole is the center of our flat and stationary Earth, just like depicted in Gleason's map and the United Nations logo. So what are the stars above our heads? And if NASA is lying about the nature of our Earth, Sun and Moon, does that mean that space and the universe are also fake and not what we think they are? The short answer is yes, space as we know it is a hoax. Our flat stationary plane does not look like this sitting in space. We will look at what the stars are and the possible real space that our flat Earth resides in. But first we must venture deeper into a different rabbit hole. We have come a long way, but we have only really scratched the surface. This next rabbit hole is deep and dark, but it is necessary. And I promise you this, on the other side lies a comprehension of things so incredible in nature you would not have thought them even possible. Follow me now to part 5, as it is time to understand the why of the lie. Right before the founding and establishment of NASA, there was a significant historical event that holds the key to understanding the reason behind their lies and the signing of the UN Treaty on Antarctica. But before looking at this event, it is necessary to examine the theory of the Big Bang, and any historical reference to such a phenomena before the theory was established in 1929 by Edwin Hubble, who was influenced by the work of Albert Einstein and Georges Lemay. When tracing the beliefs and theories on the origins of the world we inhabit through history, I discovered various creationist tales, primarily of similar nature to the Abrahamic view of creation. I also encountered various works of philosophers and scientists such as Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, Johannes Kepler and Isaac Newton that proposed the theory of the infinite nature of the universe. There is one text, however, that predates all of these ideas, the Kabbalah, a tradition of Jewish mysticism that can be dated back to 13th century BC, 1,000 years before Aristotle lived. In traditional understanding, it is said to originate from the time of Eden. The Kabbalah's account of the origin of the Earth and universe is a complex one, but the summary of its vision can be understood through its concept of Ein Sof, which translates to unending or infinity. The Kabbalah lays out its origin story as such. In the beginning, the Ein Sof withdrew into itself, creating an empty space or vacuum, within which the forces of Din began to take on an independent life. The contraction of the Ein Sof thus resulted in a purging of the harsh dross, which contained all elements of potential evil from the being of God. The empty space thus contained the forces of Din and a remnant, the Reshimu, or impression of the divine light. At this point, the Ein Sof emanated a ray, which is represented in the first letter of the Tetragrammaton. This ray worked to organize the opposing forces that now filled this space. The opposing forces were together in a vessel no bigger than a tiny spark. This ray caused the shattering of the vessel and formed the planets and brought into manifestation the primordial man. Moses Nachmanides, a 13th century Kabbalist rabbi, summarizes this origin story, stating, "There was only one physical creation, and that creation of a tiny speck. As this speck expanded out, this substance, so thin it has no essence, turned into matter as we know it." This is strikingly similar to what we have come to know as the Big Bang. Universe Today provides a succinct summary of the Big Bang. The Big Bang hypothesis states that all of the current and past matter in the universe came into existence at the same time, roughly 13.8 billion years ago. At this time, all matter was compacted into a very small ball with infinite density and intense heat called a singularity. Suddenly, the singularity began expanding and the universe as we know it began. This is the same story. Both present the idea that in the beginning there was a vacuum, and then a small speck appeared, and from there began the expansion of matter, forming the planets and the world we know today. The only difference is the Kabbalah is written in a mythological discourse, and the Big Bang is constructed in scientific discourse. But stylistic language choices aside, it appears that the Kabbalah had worked out the origins of the universe a long time before Einstein, Hubble, and others. This leaves us with two conclusions from this discovery. 1. Contemporary Big Bang theory has proven the Kabbalah and its teachings. All people who believe in this theory should seek out the Kabbalist rabbi to learn more about what they believe. Or 2. Contemporary Big Bang theory was stolen from the Kabbalah, in which case neither is correct and it is all a big lie. I will return to this origin story shortly, but before I do, it is essential that we look at some of the esoteric teachings of the Kabbalah. Kabbalah in Hebrew means to receive or to orally receive. The secret, esoteric teachings of its mysticism were orally taught, written in codes, numerologies and symbols. Symbolism and numerology are especially important in Kabbalistic mysticism. Many books of the Kabbalah are extremely cryptic in nature, especially the Book of Zohar, which translates as splendor, and the Book of Bahir, which translates as illumination. Both texts have been deemed to be coded with gematria, which is a form of numerology where letters have corresponding numbers. A well-known example of Hebrew gematria is the word chai, which translates to alive, and is composed of two Hebrew letters that add up to the number 18. This has made the number 18 a lucky number for Jewish people, and gifts of money in multiples of 18 are very popular. Symbols are equally important in the Kabbalah and have been used as a method of conveying meaning and a secret teaching since its inception. Some of these symbols are widely recognized. For instance, the Kabbalah Tree of Life, or the Sephirot, the Hamza, and perhaps most famously, the six-pointed star, the hexagram, or what is now referred to as the Star of David, and the symbol adorning Israel's flag. It is found in early texts of the Kabbalah, and its earliest Jewish association dates back to the Leningrad Codex of 1008. It is this six-pointed star that I would like to focus on now, for you see, it was not always a symbol of Israel, nor is it exclusive to Judaism. To understand the hidden history of this symbol, we must first journey to the year 1760 as Mayor Amschel Bauer returns to Frankfurt to take over his deceased father's business in moneylending. Before his death, and in his son's absence, Mayer's father had mounted a coat of arms on the front of the entrance to the counting house to honour its name. The sign features a hexagram against a red shield. It was because of this sign that Bauer changed his surname. Rot is German for red and Schild is German for sign, so he took the name and became known as Mayer Amschel Rothschild. As Mayer's business began to thrive due to his discovery of loaning money to governments rather than individuals, he enlisted Adam Weishaupt to create the Order of the Illuminati, which was completed and established on May 1st of 1776. Soon after, Weishaupt merged the secret doctrines of the Illuminati with the Continental Order of Freemasons, which was founded in 1717 and largely peaceful until this merge. He then went on to establish the famous Freemason lodges of the Grand Orient to be the Illuminati headquarters. In establishing this order, Weishaupt recruited 2,000 followers, including the most intellectual men in the arts, education, science, finance and industry. They were given the following instructions in order to gain control. Number 1. Use money and sex bribes to obtain control of men in high positions. Number 2. Colleges and universities were to cultivate students possessing exceptional abilities and train them specifically in internationalism. Number 3. All influential people were to be used as agents and placed behind the scenes of all governments as experts and specialists. Number 4. To obtain absolute control of the press. The drive for control and power soon began. Sending literature to Paris to provoke the stirrings of the French Revolution, Adam Weishart's courier was struck by lightning, revealing the texts contained inside which outlined plans to provoke such a revolution. The Bavarian authorities seized the text, and the government published the details of their doctrines in a text titled The Original Writings of the Order and Sect of the Illuminati. Unfortunately, Europe did not heed their warning, and the French Revolution took place, which made the Rothschilds a lot of money due to the laws that limited Roman Church taxes. In 1798, John Robinson, one of the leading intellectuals of his time and professor at Edinburgh University, published a book, Proofs of a Conspiracy Against Religions and Governments of Europe, carried on in the secret meetings of Freemasons, Illuminati and secret societies. Again, no one heeded Robinson's warning. In 1812, Mayer Rothschild died and laid out specific laws for the House of Rothschild, which are 1. Only males will enter the business, 2. Intermarry to preserve fortune, and 3. The eldest son of the eldest son is to become the head of the family. After his death, Mayer's children left Frankfurt and established banks in all major European cities. Nathan Rothschild moved to London at 21, where he established a banking house. During the Napoleonic Wars, the 5 Rothschild brothers worked to provide gold to both Wellington's army through Nathan in England and Napoleon's army through Jacob in France, thus establishing a formula they would retain until the present day. Exactly this: fund both sides of each war and become rich in the process and aftermath. The Napoleonic War forced Britain and many other countries in Europe to borrow vast sums from the Rothschild Bank, with interest rates they would never ever be able to pay back. Furthermore, they manipulated the stock market. During the war, speculators would watch the value of Nathan Rothschild's British war bonds in an attempt to guess who would win the war. Shortly after the battle ended, and long before anyone else knew who was the victor, Rothschild began selling bonds. Everyone assumed this meant that Napoleon had won and Europe had lost. Panic selling followed, and when prices crashed, Nathan bought the majority of these bonds. The ownership of such high-value bonds meant that the Rothschilds literally owned the Bank of England. From that moment onwards, the interests of the British Crown and the Rothschilds became so entwined that the Rothschilds were given titles of nobility. Nathan famously said, "I cared not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply." The Rothschilds used their control of the Bank of England to replace the method of shipping gold from country to country, and instead used their European banking network to establish a system of paper debits and credits, the same system we use today. At the end of this period, the Rothschild family controlled half the wealth of the entire world. During the 19th century, the Rothschilds took control over the financial operations of the Catholic Church worldwide and began setting up their banks in the United States. They also began to gain control in other areas of industry. In 1862, the Rothschilds used one of their own, John D. Rockefeller, to form an oil company called Standard Oil, which went on to dominate all competition and was funded to prominence by the Rothschilds. The Rockefellers would go on to lead oil, establish Big Pharma, and own all the major education systems, colleges in the United States. The Rothschilds' power and influence grew through the tentacles of each industry as planned with the establishment of the Illuminati. Towards the end of the 19th century, and before establishing their major dominant banking presence in the United States, the Rothschilds founded the Zionist Congress to promote Zionism, a political movement with the sole aim of moving all Jews into a singular Jewish nation state, and arranged its first meeting in Munich. The meeting was chaired by Theodor Herzl, who later stated in his diary, "It is essential that the sufferings of Jews become worse. This will assist in realization of our plans. I have an excellent idea. I shall induce anti-Semites to liquidate Jewish wealth. The anti-Semites will assist us thereby in that they will strengthen the persecution and oppression of Jews. The anti-Semites shall be our best friends. The youngest son of Jacob Rothschild also visited Palestine during this time and supplied funding to establish the first Jewish colonies there. The Rothschild plan to establish Israel and its own Rothschild-owned country was underway, but it would not be until many years later that that plan came to fruition. Notice the hexagram on the flags at the Zionist Congress. In 1910, plans were underway in the United States to set up the Rothschild centrally owned bank, the Federal Reserve. The plans for a United States central bank were met with strong opposition from some of the wealthiest figures of the time. The three most important and powerful opponents were Benjamin Guggenheim, Isidor Straus, the head of Macy's department stores, and John Jacob Astor, one of the wealthiest men in the world and good friend of genius inventor Nikola Tesla. Their total wealth at that time was $500 million. By today's standards, that would amount to nearly $11 billion. The opposition did not last long, however. Conveniently for the Rothschilds, all three powerful opponents died aboard the Titanic when it sunk in 1912. Coincidentally, it was the Illuminati puppet J.P. Morgan who funded and built the Titanic and who was also extremely keen to establish the Federal Reserve. He cancelled his ticket on the Titanic at the last minute. Congressman Charles Lindbergh said the following after the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913. The last part of this statement is especially important. From now on, depressions will be scientifically created. Like two con men working a mark, the Fed made credit easy while establishment newspapers hyped what riches could be made in the stock market. Federal Reserve meant that the dollar could now be printed outside of the government's control. It would be used to drive economic war and depressions and was the perfect machine for eternal debt. Abraham Lincoln fought against the establishment of this method and began printing his own debt-free money, what was termed greenbacks, during the American Civil War. Similarly, JFK signed an executive order which returned the US government the power to issue currency, bypassing the Rothschilds' own Federal Reserve. What do both of these presidents have in common? They wanted to print dollars for the American people against the wishes of the Rothschild system, and both were assassinated. During World War I, we see the same Rothschild war formula play out. The German Rothschild loaned money to the German government, the British Rothschild loaned money to the British government, and the French Rothschild loaned money to the French government. During the war, and while Britain is considering Germany's offer of armistice, Louis Brandeis, the elected leader of the Executive Committee for Zionist Affairs, sends a Zionist delegate from America to Britain, with the promise to bring America on the side of the British, provided the British agree to give the land of Palestine to the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds had interest in the Far East, and having their own governed state meant that they could own their own military, which they could use on any aggressor who stood in the way of those interests. In light of this, the British Foreign Secretary, Arthur James Balfour, drafted a letter which became known as the Balfour Declaration, to none other than dear Lord Rothschild. It states that the British government would do all it can to help establish Palestine a national home for the Jewish people. In 1919, the Paris Peace Conference was held to discuss reparations that the Germans needed to pay to the victors of the war. The host of the conference was Baron Edmund de Rothschild. A delegation of 117 Zionists headed up by Bernard Baruch brought up the subject of Palestine. The Germans felt betrayed as the nation had always had good relations towards Jews. The conference was also used by the Rothschilds to float the idea of setting up a world government called the League of Nations. Bernard Baruch then went on to found the Council on Foreign Relations in the US. The first objective of the Council on Foreign Relations was to gain control of the press. This task was given to none other than John D. Rockefeller, who set up many national magazines such as Life and Time magazine. With the Rothschilds' power presence now firmly established in the US, they soon began preparations for World War II. At the same time, Adolf Hitler, the Chancellor of Germany, was driving Jews out of governmental positions. A Rothschild puppet, Samuel Untermyer, the head of American delegation and blackmailer of President Roosevelt, called for all Americans to destroy German-made products, and thus began a large propaganda campaign. Once the effects of this boycott began to be felt in Germany, the Germans, who had demonstrated no violence towards the Jews up to this point, simply began boycotting Jewish stores in the same way the Jews had done to stores selling German products in America. This is the same year that President Roosevelt ordered the Illuminati eye to be placed upon all new dollar bills, along with the Latin phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum, which means a new order of the ages. 1 year later, Swiss banking secrecy laws were reformed, and it became an imprisonable offence for any bank employee to violate bank secrecy. This is all in preparation to cover the trace of the Rothschilds as they fund both sides of the war. You see, the Rothschild-controlled US company IG Farben would go on to arm Germany in the war and produce Zyklon B, the lethal gas used in the concentration camps. The Rothschilds also financed American IBM, which provided the supply of machines to the Nazis to produce the punch cards to help organize and manage initial identification and expulsion of Jews, the confiscation of their property, and their eventual extermination. Interestingly, during this time, Prescott Bush, the father of President George Herbert Walker Bush, had his company seized under the Trade-in with the Enemy Act. He was funding Hitler from America while American soldiers were fighting against the Germans. The Rothschilds' connection to Hitler may be more understated than initially realized. As Hans-Jürgen Kohler's Inside the Gestapo states, Adolf Hitler's grandmother Maria was a servant at the Rothschild mansion. You see, the war was very choreographed and had nothing but the Rothschilds' interests in mind. As Zionist Isaac Greenbaum, in a speech to the Zionist Executive Council, put so succinctly, "One cow in Palestine is worth more than all the Jews in Poland." This piece of propaganda was to scare Jewish survivors into believing their only place of safety was Israel. At the end of the war, in 1945, the Rothschilds not only profited significantly financially, but their vision of a League of Nations came to fruition with the establishment of the United Nations. British had stated that there would be no more immigration of Jews to Palestine in order to protect the Palestinians, but after the Second World War, the British transferred control of Palestine to the United Nations. The United Nations divided Palestine into two states, one Zionist and one Arab, with Jerusalem to remain as an international zone to be shared by all religious faiths. In the years that followed, the Israelis launched a series of military assaults on the Arab Palestinians, causing a mass exodus. The Israeli secret intelligence agency, the Mossad, was formed. Its motto is, "By way of deception, thou shalt do war." In 1948, the Rothschild bribed President Harry S. Truman with $2 million, which they gave him on his campaign trail, to recognize Israel as a sovereign state. The flag of Israel was soon revealed, which is none other than a blue version of the Rothschild red hexagram. And this is where the story just begins. Follow me to part 6 so we can take a look at the true meaning of this six-sided star.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Today, no war has been declared, and however fierce the struggle may be, it may never be declared in the traditional fashion. Our way of life is under attack. Those who make themselves our enemy are advancing around the globe. The survival of our friends is in danger, and yet no war has been declared. No borders have been crossed by marching troops. No missiles have been fired. If the press is awaiting a declaration of war before it imposes the self-discipline of combat conditions, then I can only say that no war ever posed a greater threat to our security. If you are awaiting a finding of clear and present danger, then I can only say that the danger has never been more clear, and its presence has never been more imminent. It requires a change in outlook, a change in tactics, a change in missions by the government, by the people, by every businessman or labor leader, and by every newspaper. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed.
Formerly acknowledged as the Star of David, the move to adopt this symbol for the flag of Israel angered many Jews who realized that the symbol is in fact not the Star of David, but a hexagram symbol that was used in the ancient mystery religions. Many anti-Zionist Jews have since gone on to participate in annual flag burning rituals. It is in the biblical figure of Solomon that we can trace the true origins of the six-pointed star or hexagram. Solomon called the star the talisman of Saturn, or what became known as the Seal of Solomon. As we see, the bull's head is enclosed in a six-pointed star and surrounded by the letters composing the name Remphan, the planetary genius of Saturn, according to the alphabet of the Magi. The bull represents Moloch worship, which we will look at shortly, but first we need to examine two passages from the Bible that provide more detail on Solomon. Kings 11, 1-5 in the Bible features this passage. But King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, "You shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods." Solomon clung to these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For it was so, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord, his God, as was the heart of his father David. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. Ashtoreth here is a female goddess and the same goddess as Ishtar in Babylon, Isis in Egypt. The Romans called her Diana, and the Greeks Artemis, and the symbol is Venus. Milcom here is a male god, and its root word means king or Baal. It is the same god that is referred to as Moloch, or Nimrod in Babylon, Osiris in Egypt, Baal in Sidon. There are overlaps with Zeus in Greek culture and Jupiter in Roman culture. The symbol is Saturn. As the passage makes clear, Solomon fell in love with the women of Egypt and began to worship these false gods. Two other passages from the Bible directly reference the symbol of the star, or the seal of Solomon, or the talisman of Saturn. But ye have borne the tabernacle of your Moloch, and Chion your images, the star of your God, which ye made to yourselves. In another passage, just before being stoned to death by the Jews, Stephen accused the Jewish leaders. And you took up the tent of Moloch, and the star of your god Remphan, the figures which you made, in order to worship them. As you see, the star in the Bible is directly correlated with the god Moloch and Remphan. Remphan is another word for Saturn. If you study the geometry of the star, you realize it has 6 points, forms 6 equilateral triangles, and its interior forms a 6-sided hexagon. The 6 points, 6 triangles, and 6 sides of the hexagon equate to 666, the specific number that the Bible designated as the mark of the beast, or Lucifer's number. As Revelation states, "Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Kings in the Bible specifically link Solomon with this number. Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. The Bible specifically states that it was Solomon that used the star and not David. In fact, there is no evidence that David was ever associated with a star. We've seen how Freemasonry had been infiltrated and overtaken by the Rothschild Illuminati agenda. Here is what Albert Pike, a Freemason in the 1800s, said about the secret society. Masonry is a search after light. That search leads us directly back, as you see, to the Kabbalah. Kabbalah is the key of the occult sciences. The true philosophy, known and practiced by Solomon, is the basis on which Masonry is founded. It is not only Albert Pike himself who reveals the links between Freemasonry, Solomon, and the Kabbalah. The symbolism of Freemasonry and the Illuminati all overlap with recurring themes of Saturn and the numerology of 666. You see, what Pike is really referring to here is the occult practices of Solomon that are traced back to ancient Egypt and Babylon, and that secretly worship the god of Saturn, or otherwise known as Moloch, or Baal, or Nimrod. In 2012, NASA released yet another CGI image, this time of Saturn's North Pole. In addition to looking very fake and absurd, the image presents the world with what is termed as Saturn's hexagon. As you can see, when connecting the lines within a 6-sided hexagon, it produces other shapes. First that of a cube by joining 3 lines, and then that of a 6-pointed star or hexagon by joining 6 lines. Studying the root word of Kabbalah, I soon realized that Kaaba in Arabic means cube, and Allah means God. Therefore, the literal translation of Kabbalah in Arabic means cube God. And then it dawned on me, I had seen the cube before. In fact, I had seen it everywhere. Here is the cube, or Kaaba, in Mecca that forms part of Muslim worship. As you can see, those worshipping the cube form circles around it, much like the rings of Saturn. Here are Orthodox Jews in their morning prayer, using the tefillin, or the black cube with scrolls inside attached to their foreheads. Here is the Pope, with the 6-pointed seal of Solomon on his hat. Interestingly, if you take the 2D shape of the crucifix and begin to fold it into a 3D shape, it produces a cube. In Hinduism, the hexagram is more commonly known as Shatkon. It is the union of Shiva, who represents the male, and Shakti, who represents the female. Hindus also refer to Shiva as Kabbalah Ishwara, the Lord of the Kabbalah. And did you know that there are huge monuments to the black cube throughout the world? Here is the 9/11 memorial from above. An inverted black cube within another inverted black cube. Furthermore, the Saturn symbolism is not just specific to religions and memorials. Even the everyday life of a so-called atheist is rife with Saturn symbolism. And this is not just limited to the cube itself or the star. The rings of Saturn populate our everyday world. We all live by the symbol of Saturn without realizing it. The symbol of Saturn is inextricable from the number 6. Saturn is the 6th planet from the Sun in the heliocentric model. Also, Saturn Day, or what we now refer to as Saturday, is the 6th day. If you look closer at the Freemason square and compass, it is indeed a broken 6-star hexagram. When linking the letters that spell Mason on the $1 bill, you get a 6-pointed hexagram with the Eye of Providence, or the Eye of Horus, specifically highlighted. Horus, again Egyptian gods. Saturn has also become inextricable with Satan or Lucifer. As Manly P. Hall writes, Saturn has also been associated with Satan, and this for numerous reasons. First, many authors argue that the word Satan is derived from the word Saturn. Second, Saturn is associated with the color black, as well as Satan. Third, ancients considered Saturn to be the furthest planet from the Sun, the latter being associated with the principle of good. Saturn is consequently the celestial body that is the less exposed to the Sun's divine light, and thus associated with the coldness of the principle of evil. Finally, the great god Pan, the horned deity, represented Saturn in ancient paganism. This half-man, half-goat creature is considered the ancestor of our modern depictions of Satan. Pan was a composite creature, the upper part, with the exception of his horns, being human, and the lower part in the form of a goat. The pipes of Pan signify the natural harmony of the spheres, and the god himself is a symbol of Saturn because this planet is enthroned in Capricorn, whose emblem is a goat. The pagan Pan also has other guises such as Baphomet, the half-goat, half-human, who has associations with Satan and Moloch. Like Saturn, Illuminati Freemasonry symbolism is prevalent throughout our society in the form of corporate logos and, as Albert Pike said, Freemasonry is the following of the philosophy of Solomon. It is also inextricable from the symbolism of Satanism. Here are some of the most recognized corporate logos we come across in our society today. Rebranding of old Masonic symbols and the emphasis on 666. 666, or the mark of the beast, is repeated throughout corporate symbolism. For instance, World Wide Web, or WWW in Jewish gematria, is 666. It is also used for the logo of the Monster energy drinks. It is also a recurring motif along with the single one eye of Providence. Many celebrities and politicians have been photographed making the 666 hand sign around the eyes. The sign forms a 6 and the 3 fingers indicates 3 score, or in other words, 666. Zechariah 11:17 mentions the eye in specific reference to straying from God and into Satan worship. Woe to the idle shepherd that leaveth the flock. The sword shall be upon his arm and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. And as we see again, many celebrities and famous people covering one eye, a gesture paying homage to the Eye of Horus, the Eye of Providence, and the darkened right eye of Satan. We also see many make the Horn of Canuto hand sign representative of Satan. The symbolism is literally everywhere. For instance, why does the Vatican's hall look like a serpent? What are the dark serpent-like figures behind the throne? And why was the Vatican's telescope initially named Lucifer? I could go on and on about the abundance of satanic, Saturn symbols in our culture, from the prevalence of Egyptian monuments to secret gestures such as the vow of silence and the Masonic one hidden hand. But I think you get the point. And there is a wealth of information out there if you want to pursue your own research. This video is only supposed to be a very basic overview of this type of symbolism. It becomes confusing because the same symbol of Saturn or Satan keeps appearing in different eras and cultures under different guises. Much like Bauer changed his name to Rothschild, the worship of Saturn has undergone so many different iterations and changes that it becomes difficult to track. I feel that this is deliberately so. And this is the point. What the Rothschilds achieved with their centralized banking and Illuminati cabal establishment of controlled leaders in every industry, such as fossil fuels, health and education, is a highly disguised and masterly executed form of infiltration. They have controlled our access to knowledge from the beginning. The Natural History Museum at Tring belonged to 2nd Baron Rothschild and is located in a Rothschild family home. The League of Nations organized the inception of the Central Natural History Museum. E.L. Rothschild Limited, a private funded family investment company and established by Sir Evelyn de Rothschild and Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, oversees a variety of Rothschild's global investments. The company currently has interests in media, real estate, agriculture and luxury goods, with a significant previous positions in financial services, technology and communications. They even own 70% of Weather Central and all of its communications. As of today, the Rothschilds own over 160 central banks and control the finances of the majority of nations on Earth. In the year 2000, there were only a few countries that did not have centrally established banks. Any nation that resists their desire to control is demonized through the media and is usually bombed under the pretense of war or terrorism. Is this starting to make sense yet? As we saw in the previous episode, all wars are deliberately choreographed, as are all politics. The opposing forces of the political left and right is all theatre to produce the illusion of choice. They are all players on the world stage whose autonomy and real governing power is limited by the elite powers such as the Rothschilds. It is the same with corporations, products and the media. The illusion of choice, when in fact they are all owned by the same top of the pyramid companies that are in the pockets of the Rothschild elite. You can discover this yourselves by just following the money. The primary aim of the Illuminati cabal is to establish Novus Ordo Seclorum, as stated on the $1 bill, and which means a new order of the ages, or a new world order. The agenda of this order is to establish a globalist one world government, with a world military, centralized banking, health, education and religion. Here we can see the former Israeli president Shimon Peres, a Rothschild puppet, meeting with the Pope to discuss uniting all religions under one world religion. And I can bet you that the one world religion would carry the symbol of Saturn. Again, I will not go into much depth about globalism and the New World Order agenda. There is a wealth of material on the internet if you are interested. The Rothschilds and the Rockefellers are just one of the many governing cabal elite families that run and rule our world. Doing justice to the complexity of this would require its own video series. My main objective is to give you a brief overview of the Rothschilds power complex and its grip on our world, and to show you the prevalence of satanic symbolism that stems from this power complex, as it is the key to understanding the lie behind the heliocentric model of the Earth, and why they would deliberately hide that our Earth is a flat, disc-like plane. Despite being studied and used by different Jewish sects today, the Kabbalah is not exclusively Jewish. It has ties that go beyond Judaism. Jewish mysticism originated with the apostate Israelites and ancient Egypt and Canaan during the time of the serpent religions of the Ammonites, the Canaanites and Egyptians, all of which trace back to Babylon. And, as I have shown you, this is evident in the symbolism. Does this mean that Orthodox Kabbalah Jews secretly worship Saturn or Satan? No. What the Rothschilds and their puppets have successfully achieved is a worldwide worship of Saturn or Satan in its various guises through deception and infiltration without the world knowing it. I am not suggesting that Jews in general worship Satan, especially in their study of the Kabbalah. Nor am I suggesting that Muslims in their prayer to the Kaaba or Catholics visiting the Vatican are Satanists. I am showing you that without actually knowing it, we are all in some way giving our energy and worship to this satanic lineage without realizing it. Even if you're an atheist, the black cube and Saturn rings are so prevalent in your life you may wear clothing with the symbolism on without even realizing. It is now important to return to the Big Bang. As I mentioned in the previous episode, the Kabbalah Ein Sof provides us two conclusions: that either the Big Bang has proven the Kabbalah and its teachings, or that the Big Bang theory was stolen from the Kabbalah. But you see, perhaps there is an even more sinister conclusion behind this. Perhaps, just perhaps, modern Kabbalists, or more specifically the Illuminati Freemasonry satanic complex, have figured out a way to force their beliefs onto others by renaming their views as science. Perhaps atheism is not atheism at all, but a deceptive form of Satan-Saturn worship, which encourages people to forsake the idea of God and creation and adopt randomness, nihilism, or the idea of nothingness, and is achieved through none other than widespread institutional control and infiltration of the sciences via the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, and other puppets. And when met with any opposition is shame from the so-called scientific community. In a nutshell, atheism legitimized coincidence. What about all the central scientific figures supporting the heliocentric model and the theory of the Big Bang? Well, here is a photo of Zionist Albert Einstein dining with Lord Rothschild. Isaac Newton was a Freemason and had a keen interest in the occult. And all big NASA figureheads and astronauts are Freemasons and openly display this, as does Neil deGrasse Tyson. There exists an organization called the Anti-Defamation League, which serves as an instrument to try and convince everyone that any mention of the Rothschilds and their allies is an anti-Semitic attack on all Jews. This is given historical weighting by the Rothschild choreographed Holocaust and also controlled by the Rothschild-Rockefeller media complex. All major mainstream media outlets can be traced back to their control. As David Rockefeller stated at the Bilderberg Conference in 1991, we are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time magazine and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranatural sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. The official controlled narrative states that the Rothschilds are Jews. They are not. They are Satanists. Satanism is the hidden religion that rules the world, and its presence is so prevalent and insidiously woven into the fabric of our everyday lives it is shocking. Its method of control primarily centers around deceit. Just as the Mossad phrase states, by way of deception, thou shalt do war. And I want you to really marinate on this. Imagine If you're that powerful that you literally own the majority of nations on Earth and most of the world's GDP, if you had an agenda, is there anything that would be able to prevent you? Would people in power or of fame be able to speak out against you without it having dire consequences? Really consider that kind of wealth and power. It is becoming more and more evident we have been deceived on the true nature of our Earth. And I understand that what I am telling you probably sounds just as ludicrous and ridiculous as when I first mentioned that the Earth is flat. And I know you are on the brink of turning this off and writing it off as garbage conspiracy theory. But let me tell you this, conspiracies are real. It's the lack of evidence that makes them a theory. Stay with me. As I said before, you cannot tell people the truth, you must show them. Do not take my word for it. I cannot just make claims that there is an elite body of people that worship Satan and have operated throughout time by deceiving the common people as to the true nature of the world, and that they have full control over all the information we receive. Prevalent Satan symbolism and the history of the Rothschilds is not enough proof or evidence. If Satanism is real, then I need to show you the true evil of such worship before I show you what they are covering up with NASA. Come with me now to part 7. We are nearly through this rabbit hole.